disciple whose name was Tabitha, which in Greek is Dorcas. She was devoted to good works and acts of charity. At that time she became ill and died. When they had washed her, they laid her in a room upstairs. Since Lydda was near Joppa, the disciples who heard that Peter was there sent 2 men to him with the request, "Please come to us without delay." So Peter got up and went with them, and when he arrived, they took him to the room upstairs. All the widows stood beside him, weeping and showing tunics and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was with them. Peter put all of them outside, and then he knelt down and prayed. He turned to the body and said, "Tabitha, get up." Then she opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. He gave her his hand and helped her up. Then, calling the saints and widows, he showed her to be alive. This became known throughout Joppa, and many believed in the Lord. Meanwhile, Peter stayed in Joppa for some time with a certain Simon, a tanner. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Christ is risen.
He is risen indeed.
Yeah, it's lost a little of its shine, isn't it? A little of its enthusiasm. Here we are in the 4th Sunday of Easter. If it had been just 1 week, I think we really could have done it. We could have really believed in the resurrection, maybe even for 2. But with each passing Sunday, the resurrection feels farther away, stranger, and more removed from our experience. And especially on a weekend like this. Some of us attended the wake for Gail's mother on Friday night, or maybe the funeral on Saturday. And if you weren't there, you might have been at the workshop that we held yesterday about helping people who are going through experiences of grief and loss. If you weren't at either of those places, maybe just a moment ago when we heard the words of the 23rd Psalm, you were transported in your mind to a time or a place when you felt death's sting. A memorial service for a loved one, a huddling up crowd at a graveside, an awkward mingling at a funeral home, a front seat pew in the church. As much as we try to lay claim to the resurrection, as much as we try to pretend that death does not scare us, does not loom large on the horizons of our lives, there's really no denying it this weekend. When you stop to think about it, we really go to kind of great lengths to try to avoid death. Think about, over the course of our whole lives, the amount of time and money that we spend trying to look or feel or dress or think younger, right? We are so kind of afraid of death that we hide our older people away. We don't put them on TV or in movies. We keep them together, hidden, as it were, from our communal view in nursing homes. More and more people die in hospitals, strange and unfamiliar environments that sterilize death and make it into the purview of experts, removing it from our homes and from our lives. We're not complaining. We'd rather avoid that mess, confronting the reality of death and our own mortality, having to deal with painful feelings that we don't know how to fix. But for all of our avoidance, just not dealing with death does not make it go away. Some of you are familiar with the popular Harry Potter series, either books or movies, and you will know that the bad guys and gals who gather around the story's supremely evil villain are known as the Death Eaters. It's a spooky and powerful title describing the way that they seem to feed off of death, taking in and ingesting hatred, fear, and violence. The Death Eaters oppose the forces of life and the love in their every manifestation in Rowling's wizarding world. They are imaginary characters in a fantasy world. But we kind of get it. We understand what it is to live as Death Eaters. For as much as we try to avoid death and all that comes with it, we find ourselves taking in more and more fear and hate, more and more pain and loss, certain only that someday we too will die. And in addition to physical death of our bodies, we face other manifestations of death. The death of the soul, the death of hope, the death of happiness or of dreams. We live through the deaths of relationships, of expectations, of imagination. Most of us in this room, I don't think, have ever been physically dead, but I'm pretty sure that each of us has been through some experience of death, one that we wear on the inside. It's simply an unavoidable part of our human existence, and one that we would really like to pretend does not exist. Now, yesterday when we were talking about grief and loss, we had a conversation about what we had learned from our faith communities, from our churches, about these topics. And Sue noted that although our whole faith centers on a gruesome, violent, and painful death, often in the church, grief can go missing from the story. We hear about Jesus' death and then his resurrection, bypassing grief entirely. So what if we understood resurrection as a challenge to face death and all that comes with it, strong in the sure knowledge that God's love and life is bigger, stronger even than death? In Acts chapter 9, the people who had been following Jesus, the disciples and others, they're trying to figure out what it means to follow him now that he is no longer there. Can you imagine? They had to majorly adjust their expectations of what this life would be. How do you follow someone who is gone? And would they just become another cult of a martyred hero? But something was different about them. I mean, if Jesus had really just died, well, what hope would they have had? What would their message or power really be? How confident would they be in the God to which they clung? But these disciples had seen the resurrected Christ. They had come face to face with a power stronger than death. And as a result, it seems that they became bold enough to go beyond our feeble efforts to outlive death's grasp. They were bold enough to face death, to imagine another way, and to live as if they expected it. When they heard that Tabitha was dying, they didn't push her from their minds. They didn't lean on the platitudes of what a good life she had lived and how she was no longer suffering, resting comfortably in God's garden. Instead, Peter goes to her and looks death in the face. When Peter says, "Tabitha, get up," I wonder what was going through his mind. Was he starting a countdown clock until he could just get out of there and leave those people to their grieving? Did he really think it was possible that something might come from his words? Was he praying, "Lord, I believe, help my unbelief"? We'll never know what was happening in his head, but this much we do know: Tabitha got up. If you look at the earliest confessions of our church, there is some serious investment in the idea that Jesus was resurrected bodily, in his skin. And this outrageous claim, it seems, had become a little difficult for folks to swallow, and so religious leaders had watered things down a little bit. Perhaps Jesus was raised spiritually. It's like trees that appear to be dead, bursting into verdant life in the spring. It's another way that we try to avoid the reality of death by avoiding the reality of the resurrection as well. The 20th century theologian Karl Barth speaks to this, saying, "The remarkable truth of the resurrection will not suffer itself to be hidden or concealed in these harmless clothes." Resurrection, he continues, is not progress, not evolution, not enlightenment, but a call from heaven to us. Rise up. You are dead, but I will give you life. That calling to rise up, I think we have it deep in our bones. It's the Spirit of God in us. It is what makes us feel when we lose someone to death that this is just not right. It is a sign of God's claim in and on our lives. And And that calling, rise up, gives us all the power that we need to face the losses, to live through grief, to open up to one another, and to allow others even to become uncomfortably vulnerable with us. So here in the 4th week of Easter, we meet the challenge. Is it possible for us to hold on to resurrection in this land of death? The resurrection calls us to give up the business of Death Eaters and start putting into our bodies the things that build life and light and joy. It doesn't mean avoiding death. It means intentionally facing death so that we can process our grief, our fears, so that we can heal from our wounds and our losses. Let this community be your foundation, your reminder, your shoulder to lean on. Because whenever one of us is suffering, there is one among us who is able to testify to the power of the one who is the resurrection and the life. And in this way, through sharing our hardest moments, we become ever more confident that death is not the strongest force in our world. It's an outrageous claim to make in this day and age that there is a power stronger than death. Or even to declare that Jesus, fully God and fully human, in his death and resurrection, God also died, and humanity was also raised to life. And yet it is what we proclaim. May you feel the power of the resurrection within you this morning. May you hear God's call to those deadened parts deep inside. May you become confident enough in the power of this love that you can face anything, even death. Hearing the call to